good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. My name is Lisa Tennant. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Client Relations at Verifi, and it is my pleasure to join everyone, or to welcome everyone this morning to our webinar on bringing refunds to light. I am joined today by one of my colleagues and actual dear friends, Gabe McGloin, who is Vice President of our International Business Development team. Gabe and I go back, I was doing the math today, Gabe, I think at least 16 years, maybe longer. We've worked together in a variety of capacities in the industry, so it's a pleasure for us to be able to talk to this topic with you all today. We are going to be talking about visa purchase return authorization, and our intent and our purpose today is really around education and best practice to help folks prepare for the changes that are coming on October 19th of this year. We have spent the past several months engaging closely with both our clients and our issuing partners, and have had a lot of learnings through that process that we look forward to sharing and hopefully helping to equip you as you prepare for this change in October as well. To get us started, I'm going to hand things off to Gabe, and he is going to talk you through the agenda and the background and the details on the program. Gabe?
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, everybody. As Lisa said, this is Gabe McGloin coming to you from Verifi out of Dublin, Ireland, where we in Ireland are patiently waiting for Hurricane Lorenzo to make landfall in Ireland. Words you probably never thought you'd hear an Irish person say, a hurricane making landfall, but that's the situation we find ourselves in. So things are fairly calm yet, but I'll update you as things progress. So Lisa, I actually think it's 18 years you and I know each other, and so I think based on the fact that I started in my career in payments in the industry as a merchant and you as an acquirer, I don't think there's I think we're fairly well qualified to have this discussion. We've had discussions like this for quite some years now, and always had a great working relationship. So it's a pleasure to be on this with you, Lisa. I'll start with the why, as the agenda says, why Visa is implementing new rules. But I suppose just before I talk about why, let me start with why now, because I always think when things come along and the card brands and others bring changes to us, to acquirers and to merchants, we say, well, why now? What's the point of now versus a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago? If we think about refunds have existed as long as e-commerce has existed, and even longer with Moto, particularly the mail order sector, being a significant user of refunds since its inception, 30 plus years ago. In the past, refunds were used as ways to retain customers, to placate customers who were irate if maybe there were billing or fulfillment errors, or if the products and services didn't work as described. They were typically used as gestures of goodwill to drive desired behaviors. So retention and basically getting a customer to a happy place. So refunds are a very important part of the payments world, and particularly for CNP and e-commerce. They're a key component of card not present and distance selling. So e-commerce, Moto, recurring, subscription, etc. But I think over the past few years, refunds almost as a standalone, they've become almost a product in our world. If you look at the global clothing, apparel, and fashion markets, where people are buying 3 different sizes or 3 different colors of garment and then returning 2 of them, that's a feature of the product for many merchants in that sector. Consider monthly charges for bundle services from someone like Amazon Prime, where they refund for partial months on a prorated basis. If you cancel because your favorite box set you finished watching it and there's nothing else on. I'm sure there's something else on if you look a bit deeper. But so refunding is a critical part of merchants selling their products and services. As we look at the changes made by the card brands in the past 20 years, we've witnessed significant improvements across the board. Improvements to authorization rates and how authorizations are done. I think it's fair to say that authorization approval rates are higher across the board. Products such as Account Updater have helped with that. Changes have been made to address the open-to-buy challenges, where credit limits and available funds are no longer locked up for as long as they used to be in the past, particularly for high-ticket items in the T&E sector, so hotels and rental cars and airlines. And then a bit closer to home, refunds have been for 7 or 8 years now an established and acknowledged way to prevent chargebacks with products such as our own cardholder dispute resolution network in the market, and we'll touch on that briefly later. In speaking about chargebacks, some advancements have been made with respect to chargebacks, with streamlining through Visa claims resolution last year, but we do feel the best is yet to come with chargeback prevention and elimination services being provided to merchants, issuers, acquirers, including Visa's VMPI or Visa Merchant Purchase Inquiry. So more on that in the coming weeks and months. So refunds, I think, overall have had less of a focus than other card brand products and services until now. And I think that the time is now because they're such a part of the world that we live in. So why is Visa implementing these changes, and what exactly do those rules entail? If we think about how refunds are handled today before the rules take effect, it happens primarily between the merchant and the acquirer. The cardholder obviously requests a refund from the merchant, and the merchant agrees to issue that refund for whatever the reason might be. The merchant submits the refund to the acquirer, and then the acquirer uses the standard batch settlement process to send to the card brands and then on to the issuers from there. This typically takes 24 to 48 hours, depending on batch cycles, after the refund is requested or granted. So the process is quite delayed in terms of the visibility and info that gets shared, most specifically with the cardholder. So Visa's primary driver for this change is to improve the visibility for when the refund is initiated and what the cardholder can then expect in terms of the date it will arrive and the amount, etc. So first and foremost, visibility is the key driver here. So what can that visibility then drive and enable? Well, ultimately, to prevent those unnecessary disputes. We hear a lot from merchants that the cardholder has contacted the merchant agrees to refund, but yet the merchant then sees a dispute or a chargeback against that same sale days later. So the goal is by providing the visibility and the information exchange to drive and eliminate those unnecessary disputes. So at the end of the day, from Visa's perspective, it starts with the cardholder. That's the business they're in, is putting those Visa cards in our hands so we can go anywhere around the world and buy things online. So it's all about the cardholder. The world we live in today, there's such an expectation of transparency and visibility and information, this whole concept that we expect to, information on demand. And these changes will help improve the cardholder experience and ensure that the issuer, the merchant, and the cardholder all understand where these refunds stand throughout the process. But even though the driver is definitely the cardholder, there's a great byproduct for the merchant. The merchants will get less calls and emails asking, where is my refund? They'll have less disgruntled customers, meaning they're much more likely to shop with that merchant again in the future. And I think overall it should be for a lot of merchants, and particularly for certain sectors where, again, as I said, refunds are a part of their whole strategy. It should make complete sense in driving down the cost to support those refund queries after the refund has been agreed to. So if we take a look at the flow on the next slide. So let's touch on important dates. So the current dates, so 19th of October for Asia Pacific, Canada, CEMEA, Latin America, and the USA. Europe is a little bit different, as everybody is probably used to by now. So at this point, April 2020 is when this is slated for Europe. And the requirement here is merchants must be prepared to receive and respond authorizations on credit vouchers / purchase returns. There's a few things going on in Europe, and we still are working with our partners in Visa and the acquirers on clarification here, because the UK and Ireland, for instance, they're not mandating it for the issuers, because they're not mandating it for the issuers because they're trying to push single message. And there's talk of extensions and waivers and all sorts of things going on in Europe. So I think it's very, very important, and we'll repeat this a number of times throughout this webinar. It's very important that you talk to your acquirer or your acquirers about these key dates, because there's probably going to be some changes, particularly in relation to waivers. So just keep an eye on keep these dates kind of in your mind, and then follow up with acquirers over the course of the next few months as things develop. So if we can just move to the next slide, and we'll look at the flow. So this is the how, and we'll just kind of run through this, because just to take a moment to step through what the flow looks like and set the expectation for what these new rules will drive. So if I start in the upper right corner, this is the cardholder communicating with the merchant in the same manner and using the same processes, the same channels merchants offer today: a call center, phone or email, a mobile app, a website, all in line with the merchant's standard policies and procedures. So there's nothing going to change there. When the merchant is initiating that refund into the acquirer or the gateway, there may be some change or no change as to how the merchant sends the refund request. Now, I say that because it's very important that merchants on this call, and all merchants, establish with your acquirers or your gateways what they need you to do. We do know that there's acquirers out there who will have the merchant continue to send a refund request in their settlement as a settlement record, and not have them send a specific refund authorization message. And the acquirer will take that then and pass through in real time the refund auth request into Visa, similar to how it's done for a purchase auth request. So this is a very important part, that you understand how this is going to work with your construct. So this could be, I know many of the merchants on this webinar will have multiple acquirers, so it's very important you pose these questions to the acquirer to say, how are you doing this? Is it, and then determine, is it the same for all your acquirers or your gateways? Because many will be working through gateways. So how has this been done? Because you may not get the exact same solution from each acquirer or gateway. So Visa then, down to step 3 into 4, Visa receives the info, and then they send it to the issuer in real time. And the issuer at this point then makes a determination. They have all the detail associated with the transaction, and they can make it available to the cardholder. So you're essentially going to see a pending refund, in, let's say, your online banking. I mean, these days with my issuer in Ireland, AIB, it's great to see that if I buy something online or in a store and I go straight into my online banking, which I now need second factor authentication for to access, but that's okay. When I go in there, I see that authorization, the purchase authorization request, straight away. Cardholders will now see refund authorization requests straight away. What a huge development that is, compared to the days, and I remember this myself as a merchant, of fielding calls from cardholders asking where the refund was, or when I was an acquirer, the merchant would call, they would give you ARN numbers, they would ask you to escalate the ARN numbers back into the card networks and have them talk to the issuers. So it was very, very clunky process, and oftentimes, you didn't get anything back. You certainly didn't get anything back for all of those queries. Now, the cardholders are going to see those pending refunds in their online banking, the mobile banking app, etc. Not exactly depicted here is that the request in step 4, if it's approved or declined, that info will be routed back through Visa, back through the acquirer / gateway, back to the merchant, so all parties know the status of that auth request and what the outcome is. And so there are declines for refunds. I mean, you think the concept of somebody declining when you're trying to put money back, who refuses to be given money. But the way the payment system works, there is a possibility for declines because that financial instrument may no longer be in use. So again, with step 5, the primary driver for doing this is to give that visibility to the cardholder. The issuer can now communicate with the cardholder. They can send a text alert showing that pending refund in the mobile banking app or the web banking, so that visibility and transparency that we all as consumers, everybody on this call is a card holder to one of the card brands. That's what we want as consumers. We want to know as soon as possible that our request has been actioned. Settlement of the refund, that happens as normal. That'll be in the next 24 to 48, sometimes to 72 hours, where the acquirer settles the refund with Visa and the issuers, and then the refunds post to the cardholder's account. So if we just move to the next slide, so optimizing refund authorizations. So a couple of key points to look for as you evaluate your readiness for this. It's very important, as I said, and I'll say it again, for your acquirer gateway, that they're ready to send the refund off for processing, and you know what you need to change now, if anything, to trigger the request to the acquirer or the gateway. Once again, some acquirers will do it one way. They'll say, I can work with this. I can leave it to the merchant to send me a refund settlement record, which they do today, and I can take that and convert a refund authorization request and send it to the card network and to the issuer. Other acquirers will say, here, Mr. Merchant, here's a spec, an authorization spec. There's a new authorization code. It's called Refund Authorization Code. You must code to this and tell me when you're sending a refund authorization, and then either a conditional deposit of that refund authorization or a new settlement record. So, like everything in payments, the devil's in the details. So, very, very important that whoever's handling those messages on your behalf, you clarify with them, and for many of you, it'll be more than one acquirer, as we know. Clarify with them how they're going to handle it. For anybody using the Verifi gateway or thinking about using the Verifi gateway, we're ready to support that today. We've been ready for the past couple of months. So check with your partners that they're expecting you to do nothing more than you do today. But if they are, then figure out what that is. And then on the merchant side, as much as possible to refund against the original payment instrument. We do realize that there are circumstances that prohibit this. The card was, it's no longer in use because it was lost or stolen, or whatever, and the cardholder is given a new card to use. So that's something that Lisa is going to delve into a little bit further. So just keep these two points in mind as we explore this further. And at that point, Lisa, I'll hand back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabe. So as Gabe mentioned, right, when you think about the act of refunding a consumer and giving money back to them, really the best possible scenario is you receive the request from the consumer for a refund, you process that refund request, and you're able to successfully get those funds back to the consumer. It seems almost counterintuitive to think that the act of giving funds back to the consumer might actually not go through in the way that you would expect them to, or you may not be able to successfully get those funds through. But we all know, right, the reality of the scenario is the status of a consumer's account or their relationship with an issuer can change over time. And there will be or can be scenarios where you attempt to process a refund authorization back to the consumer and you receive a decline response instead of an approval. And it's important to understand, although we expect those to be certainly an exception or a minority of scenarios, they can still occur, and it's important heading into the October changes to be prepared and to prepare your teams on how to manage and successfully work through that to still be able to resolve the consumer's refund request. So we're going to start by just touching base on some of those scenarios and where you might actually see or receive a decline on your refund authorization attempt. So you'll see on the screen several possible reasons or reason codes for declines, and those vary from card expired to lost or stolen, maybe changes in the account number itself, or invalid information or dating back to the original sale. We've actually worked quite closely with many of our issuing partners to understand from their perspective in what scenarios they might have to decline an attempt to give money back to a consumer. Because as Gabe mentioned, Account Updater has been in place for some time, and through that process generally facilitates the ability for an issuer to move funds to a consumer if in fact their card number has changed. So that mechanism is in place and is certainly a successful tool for helping to support that scenario. Having said that, there are still several scenarios where Account Updater may not be able to definitively solve the challenge. I'll share two of the most common responses that we've heard back from our issuing partners. The first of those would be on a debit account where the consumer has closed their debit account with the issuer and may not have provided forwarding information. So in some scenarios, although an issuer would like to get the funds directly back to the consumer, it may actually be difficult or in some cases impossible for them to be able to get that successfully to the consumer. And so in those cases, they would suggest or recommend an alternative course for refunding. Another example that we've heard back from several of our issuing partners is the scenario of a prepaid card, where in that situation, the consumer may have picked up a prepaid card, used that prepaid card and exhausted the balance, and then discarded that card. So when it comes time for them to resolve a refund request with the merchant, they no longer have that piece of plastic in their hand to be able to access the funds should they be returned to that card. So you can see through several of those examples that there will be cases where, although you're attempting to get the funds back to the original method of payment, that may not be able to be done successfully. And so we'll talk through what is your recourse for how to resolve those refund attempts if in fact you can't get the funds back to the original method of payment. I want to pause for just a moment. One of the pieces I neglected actually to mention out of the gate is through the course of the presentation, if you have questions or would like additional information on any of the pieces that Gabe and I are talking to, there is a Q&A function as part of the presentation where you can submit any questions that you have, and we'll take time to talk through those to make sure that we get you answers before the end of the presentation. One other piece that I wanted to take just a minute to touch on as it results to submitting of refunds. One of the things that Gabe talked about was making sure that you understand with your acquirer what specific steps you'll be responsible for, whether they'll initiate that refund authorization request on your behalf, or if you'll be responsible for initiating that transaction. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to tie back to the value in being able to, when you make a refund request, being able to tie that refund back to the original sale. Many acquirers will support a linking ID number that allows you to tie your refund back to the original sale, which helps improve transparency for the issuer to make sure that those funds are applied against the intended transaction. That also helps really build transparency between the merchant, the issuer, and the consumer, and helps to further eliminate questions, inquiries, potentials for dispute as well. So as you're talking to your acquirer, make sure you understand what your options are there, again, for the purpose of building that shared transparency with your consumer. All right, so we've talked about the different types of declines that can happen. Let's spend some time talking through, in the event that you do see a refund or you do attempt refund authorization and that refund authorization attempt is declined, what options do you have to remediate or to resolve, right, the customer's request for a refund in that case? Recommendation is, if you get that decline response back, it's absolutely an opportunity for you to connect with the cardholder to understand if there's been any change in their account, some updated piece of information that may support you in being able to get that transaction to go through successfully if you attempt it again. Perhaps they have had a change in account number that didn't find its way through account updater, or perhaps there's been an update, to expiration date or something else where you can get updated information and resubmit or reattempt that transaction. Absolute best first course is to connect with the consumer, let them know that you're trying to get that refund back to them as requested, that you're running into some challenges, and work with them to make sure that the transaction information you have is accurate. If you identify through that correspondence or engagement with the customer that the original method of payment is no longer an actionable form for getting them the refund, then it's appropriate to discuss alternate method of payment for you to process the refund to. Now, for those of us who have been in the industry for a long period of time, and I think Gabe and I flipped on how long we've been around earlier. Again, the concept of refunding and a method of payment alternate to the original method of payment is somewhat foreign, right? Many of us were kind of raised on the concept of you stick with the original method of payment all the way through, from sale to refund and back again, for the purpose of consistency and making sure that transparency and the relationship stays the same. Now, again, I want to reinforce that in this case, we're really talking about exceptions, right? The likelihood for decline in a refund scenario is not expected to be significant, but we know that it will happen, and so it's important to take steps to make sure you're prepared on how to address it. So in that instance, where you are unable to successfully refund back to the original method of payment, it is appropriate to ask the consumer to provide you with an alternate method of payment for a refund. Preferably, if they have another card in their wallet that they can provide back to you, make sure that you're getting the card number, the expiration date, the associated information so that you can successfully refund to that alternate method of payment is absolutely critical. If they don't have an alternate credit card for you to apply that refund back to, then it's certainly appropriate to pursue other means through checks, store credit, through cash. In any scenario, what's critical is if you are in a position to have to refund to a method of payment that's alternate from the original, is that you have a clear path and documentation to having successfully refunded the consumer through another means. And we'll talk through why that's important as part of our ongoing conversation. But in the event, right, if I request from a merchant a refund to my, I won't even use an issuer brand. I'll use a reward brand since I can be a bit of a rewards junkie. But if my original purchase was done on my Marriott card, and for whatever reason that card is no longer viable at the time that I'm looking for a refund, and I provide instead my JetBlue card, it's going to be critical that the merchant that's providing me the refund can show clearly, right, that the original sale transpired on one card, that the refund was attempted and did not go through successfully, and so then provide proof of where, or have record of where the refund was successfully applied to another card. And it's critical not only to have that documentation within your own organizations, but to make sure that you're proactively doing a follow-up communication with the consumer to reinforce, right, that you attempted to refund the original method of payment, and we highly encourage that you identify that method of payment through BIN and last four, and that you state that you were unable to successfully get that refund through, and so per the consumer's direction, you've refunded an alternate method of payment, again, identifying that method of payment with BIN and last four, the amount that you refunded, and the date of that refund as well, so that in the event that there's any question down the road of whether or not the consumer got their refund, you're able to clearly show that the refund was issued and the mechanism in which you were able to get the funds back to the consumer. Now, I had mentioned earlier on that we've actually been working very closely with our direct issuing partners and merchants over the last several months to talk through, their particular scenarios and considerations to help in preparation for this change in October. Through the course of that conversation, there were actually questions around, if I'm unable to obtain authorization for the refund, can I go ahead and just push the refund to settlement without the corresponding authorization? There are a couple of things I want to call out specific to that consideration. One is you would need to check first with your acquirer to see if they'll support refund settlement without the corresponding authorization. It's important to note, and we'll talk through this a little bit later on in the presentation, but there are additional changes coming as a result of Visa Purchase Return Off that could actually result in additional fees or the potential for a dispute if you settle without attempting to authorize that refund and doing so successfully first. So tying that back, right, to the spirit of Visa's change is they're working to drive shared visibility between the consumer, the merchant, and the issuer to the merchant's efforts and attempt to refund the consumer. If that step is skipped, it's preventing that transparency and that visibility, and it's opening up the potential for the consumer to drive questions and even disputes right through to the issuer or to the merchant. So in the spirit of the change, it is critical and expected that that merchants drive to perform that authorization step to make sure that they're supporting that transparency within the process flow. And we'll talk more about the impact and the implications of that in just a moment. So we spoke a little bit earlier about the break in the payment chain, right? And the kind of the history behind the importance of making sure that if you do a sale on a card, any subsequent activities associated with that, whether it be refund, that all take place on the same change, or I'm sorry, on the same card. Just reiterating again, in the scenario where you attempt to authorize a refund and that refund authorization won't go through, and you find yourself in a position of having of refunding an alternate method of payment, not necessarily associated with the original, make sure that you are providing clear proof of the refund to the consumer at the time that you issue it. So absolutely recommend that you're following up in writing via email or paper if you choose to do so, providing those critical details so the customer is clear on the fact that that they received funds albeit via an alternate method of payment. It's also important to maintain that proof internally in the event that a dispute is initiated against the original method of payment. So using that scenario, right, going back to my scenario of Marriott and JetBlue, if I'm unable to get my refund back to my Marriott card and it's instead applied to my JetBlue card, there is the potential, however slight it might be, that I could initiate a dispute back through my issuer, right, claiming that I didn't get my refund since it's clearly not tied back to the original method of payment. Now again, exception scenario, right? We would hope that having followed all the steps to clearly communicate and reiterate to the consumer that you've successfully been able to refund their account or an alternate method of payment, that there would be no question. But in the event that a dispute did make its way back through the original issuer, it's critical as a merchant that you have that documentation showing that you successfully refunded an alternate method of payment following an attempt to refund the original method of payment. And that documentation can be used as part of a dispute representment. Before we tag or delve into additional considerations, I did want to spend just a minute. I know we have some issuing partners on the phone as well, and I think this is good knowledge and understanding for merchants as you prepare for the change as well. You know, we had talked through, right, that the concept of authorization in a refund scenario is really very different than in a sales scenario where, you know, in the refund scenario, the merchant's looking to give money back to the consumer. And so as we discussed, right, the thought process there is it should be a very easy process flow to get money back to the consumer. As we've been working with several of our issuing partners, part of our conversation has been understanding what rules they're putting in place from a refund authorization perspective. So most of you know, right, issuers have risk mitigation rules built into their systems or through their third-party service providers to help them manage risk at the point of authorization for sale. And those protective measures are in place for the consumer and all of us who participate in that payment string. What we were surprised to find was that many issuing partners were actually enabling the same set of authorization rules for their refund process as they were for their sale process. And that might inadvertently be making it more difficult in some scenarios for refunds to make it through the authorization process successfully. So for our issuing partners that are on the phone, you know, just a shared reminder that although you've done much of your preparation work already in anticipation of merchants being ready for the October change, there's always opportunity to go back, revisit the rules that you have set around refund authorization parameters and making sure that you have those set in a way that facilitate ease in the merchant getting the funds back to the consumer, unless there's a really good reason for why they shouldn't be able to facilitate that on the original method of payment. Okay, a couple of additional considerations, future dates that will be impactful to both merchants and issuers that we wanted to speak to on the call today. April 2020 being the first. So in April of next year, Visa will allow issuers to initiate a dispute if a refund transaction is processed through the system without a corresponding authorization. Now, again, the likelihood of how often we'll see this happen isn't yet clear, but it is reinforcement to the commitment of the program and making sure that we all parties continue to collaborate together to drive transparency and visibility to refund activity. And and just using this as an opportunity, again, to reinforce the benefit to all parties in the payments flow. The more folks are aware and understand about what's happening with their transaction and the status of it, right, the more empowered certainly consumers will feel, and it will help mitigate and reduce any questions or potential disputes within the system. So again, by participating in refund authorization, making it visible to the consumer that you're addressing their refund, that the refund's on the way, they'll expect it to settle in their account shortly. It's going to mitigate those questions to you as a merchant, asking about the status of the refund, and certainly help support, right, reduction of we'll call them kind of premature disputes as folks are impatient waiting for their refunds. So definitely a good date to keep in mind for April 2020. And then we also wanted to speak to a July 1st change as well, where the authorization refund transaction will be included in Visa's misuse and zero floor limit fees for non-compliance. So this is, similar to a sale transaction, right, where there's an expectation if a merchant authorizes a transaction for sale, there should be a corresponding settlement record there as well. And if there isn't an intent to settle, there should be a reversal transaction to reverse that authorization. Again, kind of closure of the transaction itself. That same thing will be expected in July for refund authorization as well. So if you process, as a merchant, if you process a refund authorization attempt, there's an expectation, if that authorization is approved, there's an expectation that there will be a corresponding settlement record for that refund. If there isn't a corresponding settlement record for that refund, that gap will be addressed or will be included in the calculations for the misuse and zero floor limit fees. And again, July 1st, 2020 is the date there. Okay. Gabe, did you want to take a minute to touch on, I know we've talked a lot through the presentation around collaboration and shared transparency and visibility, and how Visa's purchase return authorization and the mechanism to let consumers know that a refund is pending and on its way, that driving that transparency and collaboration between members really helps improve the ecosystem and help drive down disputes. Do you want to take a minute to touch on how that fits in with some of our other tools?
Yeah, sure thing, Lisa. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're proud to say that one of the reasons that refunds have grown in volume and as a ratio to sales over the years is that our CDRN product has been causing a lot of those refunds as we worked with issuers and merchants to find a better way better alternative to a chargeback. So the solution being to refund the cardholder, and the chargeback can be suppressed. So this just gives the slide gives a very high level overview of our product suite from left to right in order of how we see the chargeback and dispute flow. When a cardholder calls an issuer, if we can work with that issuer and work with that merchant, the first thing we're going to do is try and prevent, which is our order insight product, where if the information that can be provided by the merchant in real time and provided to the issuer, who can then distribute that information to the cardholder either on the phone or via email or the mobile banking app or web banking, then that chargeback doesn't happen because the cardholder gets the information, they recognize the transaction, they remember what they bought, when they bought it, who bought it, et cetera, et cetera. So the chargeback is completely prevented and the query goes away and the merchant retains the funds. Eliminate is CDRN, where we've been for the past 7-8 years helping merchants reduce their chargeback volumes and ratios by giving them the opportunity to refund before the chargeback has been raised by the issuer, by agreeing with the issuers to pause the chargeback process for 72 hours to allow that refund to take place. So yes, we've been a proud generator of refunds, or cause of refunds, for quite some time. And then the third in the hierarchy is if the more information hasn't worked with Order Insight, or the merchant's not participating in CDRN because they're not a merchant who wants to refund, then we move into the chargeback is raised and we move into recovery mode, where we have dispute chargeback management services and dispute representment, so we can help recover by sending that compelling evidence when the chargeback is raised. So that's kind of a very brief synopsis of what we do today and how it links to refunds. But in truth, you know, we would love the day when all the chargebacks are prevented, because more information is provided to the cardholders from the merchants via the banking channel, and we can put an end to family fraud, first-party fraud, call it what you will. So that's what we're all working to, and obviously then being part of the Visa family, there's going to be some developments there as well in the coming weeks and months that we can hopefully talk about on a future webinar, hopefully coming very soon.
Gabe, I know you mentioned earlier on in the presentation, you know, the importance of folks talking directly with their acquirers. I wanted to reiterate one of those pieces, which is we have heard through several acquirers, right? Some folks are receiving deferments, or the opportunity. Acquirers have extended dates for when they need to be compliant with this change, and that may impact for some merchants requirements that are specific to them for the October timeframe. So again, just reiterating the importance of working directly with your acquirer to understand, you know, what their particular timeline is and how that impacts you and your preparedness activities.
Lisa, that's a great point, because we're watching some of these great questions come in. For instance, businesses that process MCC 6540, non-financial institutions stored value card, what's the direction there? Because today they're generally rejected because the MCC is higher risk. So that is a great point, because you know, you as a merchant, for merchants on this call, need to say, yeah, my business is this, and today, here's what's happened when I try to refund. So what's going to be the impact to me? And like I said, it's the acquirer or acquirers or potential gateways that will have the answers to that. So like I said, we're getting great questions on very specific items from merchants. And I think we can make a commitment to sit with Visa and go through all of these and provide answers to all of these as well, Lisa, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We will provide a link to the recording of the session today. So for those of you who are on the phone, that will come out along with a thank you from us within the next 24 hours. So you'll definitely receive that recorded link. And then we'd love to take a few minutes just to talk through some of the questions that we've received, answer what we can, and then certainly if we run out of time and questions continue to come in, we'll collect those and get answers and make those available in a response to the group as well. Is that fair?
Can I take the first one?
Go for it. Oh wait, I have a question first. Before you take the first question, can you just give us a hurricane update?
Yeah, the hurricane has not reached Dublin yet, so I'm still firmly in my seat, and the tree outside isn't moving too much. But this is exciting times for Ireland.
Good to know. Good to know.
So this is a great question. Does this apply to CMP merchants as well? Online transactions only. So what's interesting about this is, and the reason I like this question is because I remember when CMP transactions and e-com was 5% of global commerce, and then 10%, and then 20%. Well, last week, Peter Bailey from Visa at the MRC in Madrid said in a session that it was now 50-50. And so that's incredible. And I bring it up here because if you think about refund, if you go to a retail store and get a refund, they give you a receipt typically, at least they do here in Europe. You get a receipt to say, so you have something in your hand that kind of confirms it comes from a card machine. It's got, it's got information on it that makes you confident the refund's going to come. I also think there's a lot less refunds in retail generally, but you do get that receipt. So I think this mainly applies to CNP, where again, refunding has become part and parcel of how merchants sell and manage the whole selling online business. So this is a complete CNP/e-commerce impact, and probably negligible on retail.
There was a question as well around if the purchase return authorization is strictly providing visibility to the consumer, or if it actually helps to facilitate speeding the refund to the customer's account. I think, again, that really varies on the merchant and the acquirer and the process that they have in place for refund settlement. So, I know there are still scenarios where merchants may initiate a refund transaction, but if it's a scenario of batch processing, across their own organization and their acquirer as well, it could take several days for the refund to process through each player in the ecosystem and make its way back to the issuer and ultimately to the consumer. This purchase refund authorization is absolutely to support visibility to that pending refund until that process can be completed, however long it may take. But I know, Gabe, you had mentioned that they're, specifically in Europe, they're looking at more of a one-step process, which could in fact speed the settlement of the refund as well.
That's right, Lisa. Europe is looking at the single messaging, particularly the UK and Ireland, which is why I think the UK and Irish issuers will not mandate this. So they seem to be going a slightly different route.
Right.
And again, we don't have the full details of that at this point.
Right. Excellent. All right, let's look at some other questions. I see a question here around associated fees, and if acquirers will be charging merchants additional auth-related fees for the refund authorization transactions. I would say, again, another good example of making sure that you're talking directly to your acquirer and understanding how this refund authorization will fit into your existing process and fee structure with them to make sure that you get the most complete answer. How are we doing on time?
There's a very interesting question in there, Lisa, we've seen refunds returned to us via the chargeback pathway. When we've investigated these returns, the issuer said it was because they weren't able to see a corresponding purchase tied to the refund. If they're Visa transactions, we'd love to hear about those. So if anybody wants to email Lisa or I, our email, don't email us the card numbers, obviously, but email us and we can get in touch and talk about how to research those, because that's a very interesting corner case. Our emails are on the screen.
Yes. And it is, it's been very enlightening for us as partners with both merchants and direct to issuers as well, to be able to understand the unique perspectives of all the parties in this scenario, and then as examples or situations come up, being able to collaborate to help solve for those and look for ways to support successful execution of the refund authorization. So certainly keep the feedback coming. And I believe Gabe referenced earlier, we are looking at ways to continue to enhance, in particular, the cardholder dispute resolution network to make sure that we're supporting that level of transparency when you're initiating a refund specific to CDRN, making sure that we're supporting that transparency to the issuer as well in support of the process. So looking forward to continuing to strengthen our support in those areas as well.
No, that's right, Lisa. I've seen a few questions on here too about fees. At this point, these haven't been disclosed to us. If your acquirer has them, great, they may do. But again, we can. It's something that we can establish as the next couple of months pan out.
Perfect. I do see a couple of questions regarding if a dispute happens in the scenario of a purchase return authorization. If we go back to, right, let's just stick with the original method of payment initially. If you're able to successfully authorize a refund and settle a refund back to the original method of payment, and you still receive a corresponding dispute for that transaction, you absolutely want to respond to that dispute with the proof of refund, right, in support of the action that you took to resolve with the consumer. In the event that you ended up refunding an alternate method of payment, just tying it back to your correspondence and follow-up with the consumer that you attempted to refund that original method of payment, and ultimately, at their direction, refunded an alternate method of payment, and the documentation that that reinforces and supports that you did that. Again, just to help tie it all together from the issuer's perspective, so that they can see that the dispute was successfully resolved via another method. Maybe one more question, Gabe?
There's questions to do with closed accounts and fraud, where the account reported as fraudulent. I mean, on the closed accounts, when they're digital goods, no other way to refund, I think, you know, there is obviously an onus on the merchants to maintain that contact with the cardholder, their customer, effectively, to make sure that that somehow they can return that refund. On the accounts reported as fraud, I assume that the question there is that the bank account or the card was held fraudulently, because there was, I think that might have been, maybe it was from the same person who asked a question, that the customer being duly enriched with the refund and the provisional credit.
Right.
Will you handle refunds on fraud accounts from merchants? That's something we need to delve into a bit more.
Yeah, I think at the most simplistic level, right, if you're unable to get the refund successfully back to the original method of payment, then that needs to be managed either through a refund to an alternate method or potentially through a dispute process. So if you are able to connect with the true card holder and resolve the transaction through a successful refund and avoid the dispute, I think that's absolutely the preferred scenario. But you would want to, I would say, talk that through with your acquirer to make sure that that you're managing it in the most expedient way. So I know
it's
that
quite possible just one last thing, Lisa, on some of these questions, because they're great questions. The way I know things work from Visa to the acquirers, there'll probably be updated member letters, so we could submit these questions into the Visa product team, so they can potentially address some of these as they update member letters to get them out to acquirers. So happy to take that on.
Yeah, we'll absolutely do that. In addition, I know that we had done a communication out as part of our client newsletter with updates and notifications around the change as well, and we'll continue to evolve and update that with new information as it becomes available, and push that out to folks for general consumption also. So a big thank you to everybody for joining us for this hour and for sticking with us through the full time. As we mentioned, we'll be following up with a recording of this event, and we'll certainly work to get additional communication out to you and through our partners at Visa to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information to help support your preparedness. Thanks so much to you and Gabe too as well for joining.